How do you tell the difference between a player that's good in category leagues or a player that's good in points leagues? Who are those guys? Because you'll hear it mentioned all the time. Well, let's dig into it. Michael Bolton, he's got the answers.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I'll just have whatever makes sense. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble, on TikTok at redrock_Beeble, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms, so go ahead and give us the old double bang. Give us the thumb. Leave the comments down below as well. I do this show every year, and I'll do it again. Who's going to stop me? You are. You might. Maybe you try to stop me. But it doesn't matter, because if you know this, what we're going to talk about here, all good. You can just play it through on silent. But there are plenty of people, and we always want new people coming in to play fantasy basketball. They may not know. They may have started a season or started a league last year and just sort of jumped in and didn't really know the difference, and hear people talk about it on shows or videos or in articles or in rankings in draft rooms, and not know that there are different forms of fantasy basketball. And more importantly, how do we differentiate the players and who is good in each certain spot? And I'm not going to give you blanket rules necessarily. There's some of them there. But it's more just about who are the guys to pay attention to and why that is the case. Now, why that is important to know, even for people who are experienced in playing fantasy basketball, why I believe that is important to know is because we know this. We go into a Yahoo draft room and there is a ranking system set up. There is an X-rank column. ADP usually follows that pretty closely because a lot of people just look at that number and go off it. Yet that X-rank is a combination ranking of category leagues and points leagues. And for a lot of players, the differences between the two are not gigantic. They're not massive. But for some, it might be a 50, 60, 70 spot difference. So that ranking is always going to be there listed, that X rank as a combination. Well, for now anyway. But you have to know which guys that number applies to and know that it sort of cuts the middle. With some guys who are better in points and categories, when you see that number there, you go, well, I think the player that I'm looking at here, and we'll talk about these guys in a second, is actually better than what that ranking suggests. Or if it's on the other side, you're in a category league and you know he's better in points leagues, you go, why would I ever take him at this spot? He's nowhere near as good at that in my format. And again, for the majority of players, the difference is not that big. But for some, it is sizable. It is important. Because these differences, when we're seeing that rank, knowing which guys and why they're in a certain spot and why we would avoid or why we would go earlier than a certain rank or ADP is important to note. The basic way of looking at this, because we can obviously, in any category league, we can chuck different categories in. Any points league, we can change the weighting of points leagues. And at the end of this show, I will talk about the differences between Yahoo and ESPN even, in terms of players on default settings. But the general rule is someone whose overall stat line skews towards scoring, where they score a lot of points, because most fantasy points leagues will have 1 point per real point. And you know that guys will average 18, 19, 20, 22 points. And then it'll be like 1.5 points per assist. Okay? You'll have 3 guys who average 10 assists, which means they get 15 points there. And you'll have 40 guys who average 20 points. So the imbalance is already there. You'll have steals, which on default Yahoo is worth 3 points. So someone, the league leader in steals, averages 2 steals a game. That's 6 points. The league leader in scoring might average 34. That's 34 points. So it should be, just knowing that, really obvious, the players who are much better in a points league than in a category league. If you score a lot, you are better in a points league. The other thing is a lot of points leagues don't factor in the efficiency stuff all that much. So if you are a volume scorer who might be bad at free throws or bad at field goals or bad at both, then your value in a points league will go up. Because as long as you're scoring, it doesn't matter how you get there. Now, obviously, standard ESPN versus standard Yahoo is a little bit different because they do weight some efficiency on ESPN. It's still not an overwhelming thing, but they do weight it. On the converse side of that is the obvious thing. If someone's not a high scorer, but they're a good player at getting good steals, or they're a good blocks guy, or a high assist player, or a guy that gets by on really good field goals or really good free throws, then their category value is going to be higher than their points league value. Because those things, they're just little peripherals. A good fantasy player in Yahoo points averages, so say 45. The top echelon's 60, but 45 is a very good player. And of that 45, 25 of it is from the points category. So the other 8 categories that you'd normally score in a category league contribute to 20 overall points, less than half. It's an outrageously large weighting difference, but that is how it works. And I don't even know if I hit this little intro stinger, but I'll do it again just to remind you. We're looking at the differences, and that's the basic way. High volume scorer that can have iffy percentages and not a good defensive stats player, better in points leagues than in category leagues. Someone who has some iffy percentages are better in points leagues than categories. The guys that are better in category leagues than points guys are lower volume scorers who generate decent and pretty good defensive stats or are hyper efficient in their percentages. That is the basic thing. When you understand that the majority, in a lot of cases, half of a fantasy points score is brought by just real life scoring, that is how you can, it's not even cracking the code. It is pretty obvious, but that's what it is. If you score a lot, you're just going to be better in a points league. And if you score a lot with bad efficiency, then the difference, the gulf between the rankings on those two formats is pretty significant. So we're going to get in and talk about all of that's the rationale, that's the ways we spot it, that's the general ideal of how we spot a good points league guy versus a good category league. There are plenty of people who are good in both. Luka Doncic, Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They're probably going to be the top 4 guys in every draft, regardless of format. But there are going to be certain players who do jump into different spots based on these differences and the way that scoring is done. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Game Time's got a new feature, and I have told you about this new feature before. I'm going to tell you about it again, but it's called Game Time Picks. It means getting the tickets for your favorite live event. It's even easier because instead of having to sift through all of the different types of tickets, all of the thousands of options that'll be there, well, you don't have to because they'll find the best options. They'll put them at the top of the list, and then you just go through them and choose them from there. It's a massive time saver, whether you're going to baseball games or concerts or theater or whatever it is. They've also got the panoramic views from your seat, so you can check exactly what you're going to be seeing when you're sitting down. You've also got the all-in pricing, which shows you the total price up front. Now, in the app, you go and you got to toggle that on, and you turn that feature on so that you can see that all-in pricing, but that's another great way of viewing those prices there as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, so now that we're talking about who's better in points and who's better in category leagues, let's actually just talk about it because these are... Now, I did a comparison of players in category leagues and points leagues using Yahoo scoring, using ESPN scoring, and using -1 category league rankings, which you know is the way that I like to talk about it for head-to-head leagues, right? And when I compared that to Yahoo, when I compared that to ESPN points, the names basically were exactly the same. The top 6 names were exactly the same. Now, it's not talking about a guy that's the 380th best player and then he becomes the 300th best player in a points league. I don't care about that. I want to talk about more relevant guys for majority of leagues. So when we're talking about category leagues. Again, this all ties into the initial discussion that I had about who are the guys who are able to be better in category leagues. Alex Caruso. Like, he might not be a draftable player in a Yahoo or an ESPN points league. He might score 7 points a game. But he should have good percentages. He should get unbelievably good steal numbers. He should get great block numbers for a guard especially. He should get some assists. And all that has real value in a category league. Now, it's not for me to tell you that he's going to be awesome in a category league, because having a low scoring situation does reduce your overall upside. But in a points league, Caruso is like a 24-point guy maybe? Not someone that you care about. So you will see sites and shows and podcasts or whatever talk about that Caruso is probably going to be some sort of a steal. And I agree there is significant value in him in a category league. But in a points league, it's not. It's like, I'm not drafting this guy. Why would I bother? There's no point in that. And again, understanding that difference is really important. And that trickles down to talking about Herbalife Jones. Jonesy is the similar sort of player. He averaged 11 points a game last season. He 3.5 rebounds and 2.5 assists. But, 1.4 steals and 0.8 blocks, and he really, really good free throws and almost 50% from the field. But for a fantasy points league, this stuff is it's just not that important. It's just not that exciting. It just doesn't move any sort of needle whatsoever. You could make an argument that there's a 40, 45 spot difference between where Jones is in a category league versus where he is in a points league. And given the players there in New Orleans, he's not going to be a good option, I don't think, for majority of points leagues. One of the biggest things we look for is, I talked about scoring, but usage. To be a good points league player, you just need high usage. And there is such a strong correlation. Minutes, usage, bang, you're a good points league player. Herb might have 13% usage, 12% usage. And there's uncertainty around minutes and all that sort of stuff. In terms of some other names that are better in a points format, it's the same sort of players. It's Draymond Green, who might average 7 points, but 7 rebounds and 7 assists. Yeah, his steal and block numbers have dropped over time, but that ability to get those assist numbers and post some okay field goal percentage numbers at times is unbelievably useful. OG Anunoby, you'll see him ranked really, really low currently on Yahoo. Same with Draymond. Again, it's trying to sort of split the difference, split the middle. And in a points league, sure, like, he is not going to generate big points numbers. OG, he's not going to put up huge scoring bursts, but he will be a chance to lead the league in steals. He will get some blocks. He should be relatively efficient. He will get strong rebounds, which just doesn't matter that much. Mike Conley, another name. He is going to be the starting point guard for the Wolves. He may not average even double-digit scoring, but he should shoot really well. I think he's been 90% plus from the line 3 of the last 4 years. He hit an incredible 40+% from 3 last season. But in like a Yahoo scoring system, that doesn't even matter. It's all about getting usage and volume. And if you're not scoring enough, well, it does not matter. What if he averages 9 with 6 assists and 1 steal? That doesn't matter. Versus someone who averages 20 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, Jordan Clarkson style. We know which one we want for category leagues, and we know who we want for points. And the same goes with Jalen Suggs. A player whose value in a category league is built off the back of defensive stats, steals, and out-of-position blocks. Not great assist numbers, but they're not bad. He hits some threes. But bringing the defensive stats, bringing some solid enough percentages, his field goal percentage did improve. Well, his three-point percentage especially improved. Bringing that to a category league is awesome. And in a points league, it really doesn't matter that much. What about the flip side? Again, these are names that a lot of you will just know. You will know that this guy is a better points league guy than category league guy. And this man has just been at the top of this list for so long. He's always been here. His name's Rowan Barrett Jr. Now, I actually think in category leagues this year is probably the first time that I'm going to be not targeting, that's the wrong word, for Barrett, but given the way that he changed his game in Toronto last season, I will be I'll be interested. I'll be happy to draft him in a category league, Barrett. But In a points league, he could easily crack the top 50. I don't think that's an outrageous statement either. Like, he might be 60 spots better in a points league versus a category league. Again, I don't think there's anything like outrageous in that at all. He could very easily get to that number. Without really too much to worry about. So we know that he struggles with his free throw percentage. Barrett, we know that in the past he's had field goal percentage issues, which I'm not worried about. We know he never gets steals or blocks. That is never something he really has ever done. He scores. And he probably scores 20 points per game again, which obviously for a points league is awesome. That's a top 6 round guy. In a category league, like 80th, 90th maybe. I think that's possible, but it's not guaranteed. The obvious one. Well, he's one of the obvious ones, Barrett. It's just scoring, lack of defense. In the past, both percentages bad. But I do think field goal percentage jumps up. Aaron Gordon is one of these guys. Really useful real-life player, but a low usage. He's a lower usage guy, but part of the issue for him in a category league is the lack of defensive stats. Part of the issue in a category league is the bad free throw percentage, which even though like my -1 rankings take that problem away, he is still a significantly better option here in a points league. Like, he becomes harder to draft overall in a category league, but around 110 in a points league, it makes sense. He can be a top 100 player, and maybe with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope gone, we do get a little bit more out of Aaron Gordon scoring-wise. But his lack of defense, he's a good rebounder. He scores okay. He's going to be a double-digit scorer. But it's taking away a lot of those negatives that do boost him up into points leagues. The one who I'll say should stand sort of not even alone, but he's the new RJ Barrett in terms of carrying the torch for this category. It's Paolo Banchero. Because you are going to see him ranked at an obviously crazy sort of number here or on Yahoo. It's like the number is going to be like outrageous of where Paolo is ranked. In fact, he's currently ranked at 37 over on Yahoo. And there'll be many category league people who see that and go, that's insane. He's barely a draftable player, which again, I significantly push back on. But he is in a spot where that 37 position is actually underselling his value in category leagues, in points leagues, where he's borderline round 2 player. He's between 22 to 27, I think, in a points league. But for a category league, he's probably, to me, in the 70 zone, 60 zone. Understanding, in a roto league, it's even further down because you do have to have some punts involved. Now, there's going to be some steps forward for Paolo, but he is the guy. Points, rebounds, assists. No steals, no blocks, bad field goals, bad free throws, high turnovers as well, and not huge volume threes. If you ever want to see, at the moment, the absolute stereotype of a player who is better in points leagues than categories, it's Paolo. You stack up the PRAs and you suck at the other categories. And that's how you turn into a first 2-round top 25 points league player. And for a guy that some will say is not a top 100 category guy. Again, I don't ascribe to that for the category league part of it. I think he's around 6-7-ish player with room to improve. But there is a very, very sizable difference between where he sits. The other names on there, again, it's the same sort of structure. John Kuminga. He's going to see his usage increase in Golden State. I don't know whether he starts or not, but what I do know is he doesn't get steals, he doesn't get blocks. There can be some iffiness with his free throws in particular. He is not a volume 3-point shooter. He scores, he gets some rebounds, he doesn't really get assists. That's what he does. And unless you're expecting a lot of those other things to change, he's going to be that guy that's around 100-ish, I guess, in a category league, around that area. And, top 70, top 60 in points leagues. It's a big difference. Pascal Siakam is an interesting one because I think people think of Siakam, who is an All-NBA player in the past, as being a more well-rounded player. And I get that. But look at his numbers. He gets no steals. He gets no blocks. He has percentage problems. He scores. He gets some rebounds. He gets some assists. He is Paolo Banchero. Like the figures between those two are very similar, with the lack of defensive stats and the points, rebounds, assists. So Siakam is someone that you will see ranked at times relatively highly on Yahoo. In fact, where is he pre-ranked at the moment? He's at 60. Actually, he's at 62 on Yahoo, which is probably not far off the spot where you want to look at him. But for points leagues, like, that's a top 30 player. So this is one of the ones where the ranking actually skews for Pascal to where he sits in category leagues, in that 50-60 zone. Well, he's a borderline round 2 player in a points league. So that's the difference there. And then, again, it's the same guy. It's Twitter fingers himself, Kyle Kuzma, who scores. He'll have good volume in Washington. He has improved his assist numbers. His rebounds are solid, but he gets no steals. He gets no blocks. He has bad field goals. He has bad free throws. We know the combination. He will be a player that scores really well, obviously. But he might be the 80th best guy in a category league and the 50th best player in a points league. It is, once again, a very sizable difference, and it's the same stuff. No defense, bad at 1 or 2 of the percentages, rack up points, rebounds, assists. It's what these guys do. Barrett, Gordon, Banchero, Kuminga, Siakam, Kuzma. It's just what they do. You can also look at like a Brandon Ingram. He's in that mix as well. He's one of those players. Kobe White could be in that mix as well. There's a lot of those guys, Shaden Sharp, who fit that mold. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We've talked about FanDuel for a very long time, and now they've got something, well, they're America's number one sportsbook, obviously. They've got something a little bit different to chuck out there for you. Right now, right into September the 22nd, so it's about a month, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you need to have is a Google account, which I'm sure you already have, and a current form of payment. And you can cancel that at any time. You get that 3-week free trial just by placing a $5 bet on FanDuel. So go to FanDuel.com right now. Actually, FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA. That's where you want to go. And you can download America's number one sportsbook and get yourself that free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket so you can watch all regular season Sunday afternoon out of market games. FanDuel.com/LockedOn to check it out. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. So again, this show is, again, probably more for the newer people playing fantasy, the guys who want a little bit of a refresher or haven't necessarily paid that much attention to these sort of things or how to decipher the rankings. I get that. What I just want to quickly highlight now is that, like, you might be in and this is where giving advice on points leagues can become really tricky, because there's, the two main providers are Yahoo and ESPN, and their scoring system is different. This is what is also frustrating, is the NBA about 6 years ago came out and said, all right, we want to institute a standard fantasy points scoring system. Are you guys on board? And they said yes. And then 2 years later, ESPN changed it. They wanted consistency so that if you're playing on FanDuel or DraftKings for DFS, if you look, the NBA was tweeting out the daily fantasy performers. If you're playing on Yahoo, you're playing on ESPN, everyone's scoring was the same and we could compare. ESPN, in their vaunted wisdom of fantasy basketball leadership, decided they were going to change it. Now, to be fair, ESPN's scoring system, I believe, is a better fantasy point scoring system. It upweights steal and blocks from 3 to 4, Yahoo versus ESPN. It upweights them. Your assists go up to 2. But then when they do something weird where they count every 3 that you make as a bonus point, which I don't get. Because, hear me out now, when you actually score a 3, you already get 1 extra point. So when you hit a 3 on ESPN, or if you hit a 2, you get 2 points. But if you hit a 3, you get 4 points. Because, But then they added an efficiency part of it, where it's any field goal that you make gets 2 points, and any field goal that you attempt is -1. So, anytime you make a 2-pointer, you get 3 fantasy points. anytime you make a 3-pointer, you get 5 fantasy points because, of course. Now, every time you miss a 3-pointer, you lose a point. Every time you miss a field goal, you lose a point. And with free throws, it's just a 1-for-1. You have a +1 if you make a free throw, which again is a point. And you have a -1 if you make a... But I can, I guess, sort of understand that one because if you make a free throw, the +1, -1 cancels each other out. And all that is doing, realistically, is just penalizing you each time you miss a free throw. You lose 1 point. Which again, I'm not sure it's necessary, but it's what happens. So that's the differences between Yahoo and ESPN in scoring. Turnovers are also worth 2 on ESPN versus 1 on Yahoo. But that's the problem, is that we put out this default thing the NBA wants to happen, and then ESPN changes their mind 2 years later. Even though it's a better scoring system, I think it still leads to this frustration. So then you got Sleeper coming in with their insane, ridiculous, dumb format. And their difference in scoring, where there's default points for ejections. Like, come on. So that's where we can start talking about, oh, in my league, you got 100 points. In my league, you got 60. Okay, it becomes very hard to provide information or talk about it in a uniform manner. Yes? And I'm going to actually highlight some of that stuff now, because if you're just going to compare my projected points for Yahoo and for ESPN, some of these players have differences between the two formats of 2 rounds, 24 spots, which, again, considering their points league formats, that's big. Now, the differences between a category league and a points league guy is often 50 spots or 60 spots. But having 2 rounds difference between the 2 different forms of point scoring, it's a little frustrating. And it's where, again, understanding what your scoring system is how you're going to value them. I'm not going to spend gigantic amounts of time here, but if you're the guys that are better in Yahoo, Yusuf Nurkic, Andre Drummond, Scoot Henderson comes up there as well. Because remember, Yahoo does not punish bad shooting. And Scoot could be a very bad shooter. Doesn't punish it. Andre Drummond can be a bad free throw guy. We know that. Doesn't get punished. Yusuf Nurkic is not a good free throw guy, and he's not a good field goal guy for a center. Doesn't get punished. And the same goes with Jalen Green, who is a guy that can have some really poor field goal percentage. He's not an elite free throw guy. And then he does all the standard things of scoring and some rebounds and some assists. But his value in a Yahoo league is significantly better than what it is in an ESPN league. Again, leading to these, what are we talking about? Yahoo points or ESPN points, better in this or better in that. So he's another one. Last year he averaged almost 20 points a game, but shot 42 from the field and only 80. And I say only 80, that's average. You talk about someone who wants to be good at free throws, it's 86. But if he's only 80, and ESPN, there is a level of punishment for missing some shots. So he drops down there and he's better in a Yahoo points format. And then 2 Portland teammates come up on this list as well. Jeremy Grant, who averaged, 3.5 rebounds a game. He scores a lot, that's true. And he has some very iffy field goal percentage, so he's better in Yahoo than ESPN. And Shaedon Sharpe, the same. We haven't seen a level of efficiency from him yet at this point. And then, to be, to be even, to balance the scales out, we're going to talk about the players here who are better in a ESPN scoring system versus better in a Yahoo system. So it's, again, similar stuff. We know that ESPN gives you the extra bonus for steals and blocks. We know there's punishment for efficiency in ESPN scoring systems. So the names here make sense. I think that makes sense anyway. At the top of the list is maximum Derek White. Derek White is not a good points league player compared to his value in category leagues, but then he's a better ESPN points guy than he is a Yahoo points guy. Because he generates some steals, he generates some blocks. They're scored higher in ESPN. He is relatively efficient, so he's not getting the punishment that a lot of other guards in that position would. But it's the defensive value that he brings that gives us that. So White, who averaged 15 points a game, he hit 2.73, so there's the bonus there on ESPN. 1 steal and 1.2 blocks per game. You're talking almost 8.5 fantasy points from him there, whereas on Yahoo, that's like 6.2. So an extra 2 points. He's at 46 and 90 from the line. Really good numbers, which he doesn't benefit from over on Yahoo, but there is a benefit to having a 90% scorer from the line on ESPN for points leagues. Some other names, it's a similar, again, mold of player. Chris Paul. For a point guard, he's usually pretty efficient. He can generate some steals. You get a little bit of extra value on assists, 1.5 points versus 2 points on ESPN. We know that's what Paul does. Dan Gafford, better in ESPN points than Yahoo. He's barely a draftable player in Yahoo points leagues. ESPN, he's there, but he's still not great compared to category leagues, but it's a big difference because the field goal percentage efficiency counts. Trace Jackson-Davis, he gets by on some really good field goal percentage. He blocks some shots, which doesn't really mean that much in Yahoo. It just means that little bit, 15, 20 spots more on ESPN. And then 2 guards. One of them is Fred VanVleet, who we know is not a great shooter, but he's a big steals guy. He's a very big blocks guy for what it was last year for a guard position. And that helps him. He's still way better in category leagues. And Bradley Beal is the last one that I want to mention here. Beal shot really well last season. The injuries were annoying, but his shooting percentages were strong, really strong. And that gives you the boost on ESPN. So, again, that's just an extra added nuance to all of this. And that'll do it. We've got another show coming later today, an Atlanta Hawks season preview. Pretty excited to get into that. So make sure you stick around and subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on any of the shows that we put out. But that's, again, just a basic overview on who's better in categories, who's better in points, how you can eyeball it, sort of just put the pencil out and measure it. Like, who's better here? Who's going to be worse? How do we interpret that off pre-ranks? And how we can use that to our advantage. And I think we were able to answer that question here. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.